It was supposed to be just a simple visit, just a few hours at my grandma's house to play a game. But the moment we walked in, the air was thick with something I couldn't name. A past argument, a silent tension, and the weight of my uncle's yelling hung in every corner. And now, all I want is the Nintendo Switch she keeps tucked away, unused. But at what cost? It started years ago, on a bright afternoon that now feels almost unreal in my memory. My grandma, with her ever-present gentle smile, had bought a Nintendo Switch for me and my siblings. She set it up at her house, a kind of quiet invitation for us to escape, to laugh and play whenever we visited. Back then, it was pure joy. Hours spent exploring virtual worlds, laughing at silly mishaps, and forgetting about homework or responsibilities. But time changes everything. We grew older. My sister, soon to graduate college, was constantly buried in her textbooks. My brother, now a high school junior, had a job that took up his evenings, and I was preparing for another college semester, already feeling the pressure mount. Visits became rare, fleeting, a few stolen hours here and there. The last time we were at Grandma's, we could barely stay long enough to catch our breath. I remember my sister glancing at her laptop, whispering apologies for the homework she couldn't escape. I had my own classes waiting. My brother checked the clock obsessively, calculating when he had to leave. And all the while, Grandma lingered near the door, a quiet wish in her eyes. "I wish you could stay longer," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. And then, unexpectedly, my uncle chimed in from the speakerphone, sharp and insistent. "Your grandma spends a lot of time making you guys happy. You need to make her happy in return." The words were meant to guilt us, I think, but they left a strange ache in my chest instead. Christmas 2025 was supposed to be a happy reunion. Instead, it became the memory I can't shake. My grandma and uncle came to visit, and in what felt like minutes, my uncle's temper erupted. He argued with my mom over some meaningless issue, a noise-filled storm of accusations and raised voices. My grandma just sat there, silent, her hands folded as if the walls themselves would absorb the tension. When our eyes met across the room, she gave me a small, awkward smile, a smile that seemed to acknowledge my fear without offering comfort. For 30 endless minutes, I sat frozen, heart pounding, watching the chaos. Eventually they left, but the echo of that argument lingered far longer than their departure. In the months since, my interactions with my grandma were cautious, minimal. My uncle, non-existent. No apologies. Nothing. Just silence. And yet, recently, a strange desire took hold. The Nintendo Switch. It sat at my grandma's house, unused, waiting. My brother had his own, fiercely guarded, and I rarely got to play. I thought about games like Paper Mario, Luigi's Mansion, Animal Crossing, worlds I longed to escape into, alone and in control. But every thought came tangled with guilt. Was I only considering visiting her to claim the Switch? The thought made my stomach twist. Could I face the awkward tension lingering from Christmas? Could I walk into that silent battlefield just to retrieve a console? For now, I wait. I hesitate. The air remains thick, unresolved, but the lure of the Switch pulls at me, whispering that maybe, just maybe, there's a way to have both. The game, and my grandmother's company. Days blurred together as I wrestled with the decision. Every time I imagined stepping back into my grandma's living room, the memory of that Christmas argument flared like a warning light. My uncle's voice, booming and accusatory, echoed in my mind. My grandma's silent, uneasy smile haunted me. And yet, the Switch called to me, not just as a game console, but as a fragile link to my childhood, a way to reconnect with the part of my family I had drifted from. I debated it with myself endlessly. I pictured myself walking through the front door, suitcase of nerves in hand, forcing a polite smile, while my stomach twisted with anxiety. Would she remember the tension? Would she still be that same warm, gentle presence? Or would the air be thick with awkwardness, impossible to cut through? I felt caught in a storm between longing and fear, nostalgia and hesitation. One afternoon, unable to hold back any longer, I spoke to my mom about it. She listened, nodding thoughtfully, then said something I hadn't considered. Why not just go? Spend a little time with your grandma. The Switch can be a reason to see her, not the only reason. Her words were simple, yet they struck a chord. The Switch wasn't just a device. It was a bridge. But bridges require walking across them, and right now, that path was littered with tension. I thought about how much I had missed. Not just the games, but the laughter, the smell of her kitchen, the way she hummed while tidying up. I remembered how, as kids, we would sit cross-legged on her floor, controllers in hand, yelling at each other and celebrating ridiculous victories. That warmth felt distant now, shadowed by arguments and silence. Could I reclaim it? Could I go back without reigniting old wounds? My internal struggle became almost physical. I would sit in my room, staring at the Switch menu online, heart racing as I imagined what it would feel like to finally hold it, to navigate the buttons and watch the screen come alive. But then the thought of seeing my uncle, or worse, that same Christmas tension, would make me freeze. My fingers hovered over the controller, but I couldn't move. And then, in a quiet, almost guilty moment, I realized something. Maybe it wasn't just about the Switch anymore. Maybe it was about taking the first step, about testing whether the relationship with my grandma could survive the past, even just a little. I wanted to hope, wanted to believe that we could play together, laugh a little, and leave the silence behind, even if only for an hour. But hope is fragile, and fear is heavy. Weeks passed, and the longing for the Switch grew stronger. I couldn't stop thinking about it, not just the games themselves, but the sense of control, of reclaiming a piece of my childhood that had quietly slipped away. But every time I imagined walking into Grandma's house, I felt the invisible weight of unspoken words and unresolved tension pressing down on me. It wasn't just the Switch. It was the history, the arguments, the fear of stepping into a storm I wasn't sure I could weather. I found myself hesitating even when I called my grandma. The conversations were polite, but brief, stilted. There was a distance now, a fragile layer of silence that hung over every word. When she mentioned the Switch casually, my stomach flipped. Was it an invitation, or just a passing comment? Could I take it without making things worse? Every thought seemed to spiral, each one heavier than the last. One evening, I sat alone in my room, my fingers tracing the edges of my own Switch box, the one my brother guarded fiercely. I imagined her house, the worn couch, the scent of cinnamon from her kitchen, and that silent tension from Christmas creeping along the walls. I realized then that the decision wasn't about the console anymore. It was about courage, about whether I could confront the awkwardness, face the past, and step into a room where old wounds still throbbed under the surface. I replayed the Christmas scene over and over, my uncle yelling, my mom trying to reason, my grandma frozen like a statue, and me, small and frightened across the room. That moment had left a scar, subtle but persistent, but the scar also reminded me of something important. I had grown since then. I was older, stronger, more aware, and maybe, just maybe, that gave me a chance to try again. I began to plan, not just the visit, but how I would approach it. Maybe I'd bring a small gift, something to lighten the mood. Maybe I'd start with conversation before even mentioning the switch. Maybe I'd just sit with her for a few minutes and see if the warmth was still there. See if the air could clear even slightly. Every option carried risk. Every step forward felt like walking a tightrope. But the desire was too strong to ignore. And yet, the fear lingered. The thought of facing my uncle, or even just the memory of him, made my chest tighten. What if the old tension returned? What if the visit turned into another battle of words and silent frustration? My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each one darker than the last. But beneath it all, a stubborn spark of hope burned. Maybe, in that fragile space between fear and desire, something good could happen. Finally, I made the decision. Not to rush, not to demand, but to take a step. I would go to my grandma's house, not just for the switch, but for her, for the chance to reconnect, even in a small way. I knew the air might still be thick, and that my uncle's presence, or his absence, would shape the tension in ways I couldn't predict. But I also knew that sitting in fear wouldn't bring the laughter back, or the warmth of her kitchen, or the joy of holding that controller and losing myself in a game I loved. I haven't gone yet. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. I tell myself that the first step is always the hardest, and maybe, when I finally walk through that door, I'll find her waiting with that same gentle smile, and for a moment, the past argument will fade. Maybe we'll sit together, controllers in hand, and remember what it felt like to be a family. Not perfect, but ours. The Switch is more than a console now. It's a test, a bridge, a chance to reclaim something lost and fragile. And despite the fear, despite the awkwardness, I feel a flicker of hope.